Hey there all you Droidiacs, this is David from the Droid Workshop, and in today's video I'm finally getting back to R2-C, my Astromech, and I'm going to show you how I got to this point right here. Now I have been following the instructions laid out by Mr. Badley because these are his Mark III files, and if you would like to build one for yourself, be sure to check out the link to his Patreon page in the description down below. Now, on that note, I am not an expert, I am not perfect, I will make mistakes, I have made mistakes with this. But I'm doing this all for fun, as you should be too. In fact, I'm using this droid as a test droid so that I can perfect all of my building methods before I move on to the next one. And yes, you did hear me right, I am going to build another one. Because it was after I built this one that I realized that there were other files available where the back door could be removed for easier access to the electronics. And I was 90% done with this one when I realized that those were available. But I figured, what the heck? The more the merrier, right? So, without any further delay, let's get started. There are two sets of body print files. One is a single ring print, where you can do the skirt and 3 main body rings all as one single print each. I've honestly never printed something that big before, so I chose to use the cut files available. It meant more printing time, but at least for this, I knew if one section messed up, it wasn't going to be a lot of wasted filament, not to mention a few choice words. I did print the top ring, and I have that set to the side for now because that will come in later when I get the Lazy Susan set up for the dome. I was directed to an internet store where I could get the correct size and length rod for the body. I'll put a link for that in the description down below. They come in different lengths, so for this I got the 4-footers and cut them in half. Nut on the bottom and top and you're good to go. One thing I may upgrade for later is using a Nylox nut on the bottom to make sure it never comes off. Okay, so finally got the skirt done. This is what happened to the last one. It was kind of flimsy. I didn't print it thick enough. The walls were terrible, and I put the bolts in. I put the nuts in the bottom instead of the bolts like I should have. So in trying to take it out, I realized just how crappy this print was, and it was my fault, not the fault of the file maker. But I reprinted, and now I've got very solid pieces. My CR10 started messing up with me after I got these two pieces printed, so I had to switch over to my Ender, and I had to do all of them in small pieces. Come to find out, luckily, the two files will work together. By now most everyone knows what a Greeble is, but for those who don't, it was a term used by the filmmakers of Star Wars for all the extra bits used to dress up the models, costumes, and sets. In this case, the Greebles are all the panels, vents, ports, etc., not printed as part of the body itself. The files for these have slots for the nuts and bolts used to install them. For these, they're supposed to have square nuts, but sadly, 4mm square nuts are in short supply at the local hardware stores. You can use regular hex nuts, but it does take a little finagling to get them in. When it's time to move on to the legs and for the next droid, I found a link for 4mm square nuts on Amazon, and I've already picked up a batch for that. You may notice that the vents don't have the fingers yet, the power couplings don't have the smaller bits, and the octagon ports are lacking the main guts. I chose not to attach them yet so I could more easily finish and paint them at a later time. For now, I just wanted to get the main body done. The doors are pretty self-explanatory. For the hinges, the instructions recommend a 2mm pin. What I did was actually print my own 2mm rods from PLA, and so far they're working great when printed in the correct orientation. I could have gone with the standard gear ring with single crossbar, but I chose to use the modified ring gear mount because I'm planning on putting all kinds of stuff into the head, like the periscope and some other things. When I was putting together the inner ring gear, I noticed because of the connection tabs it was a bit wobbly, so I placed them on the Lazy Susan first and bolted them in place before permanently bonding them together. For this, I used a 3D pin. It's simple, cheap, and if you don't have one, get one. They are a lifesaver. In the instructions, it mentions that using 6 bolts on the inner gear may be an overkill, and 3 are fine. Because I'm planning on upgrading later, I did put in the extra bolts. If you do this too, just don't forget to countersink the flathead bolts as recommended. I watched another builder video, and they recommended printing the wider versions of the lower dome ring, and I did. Thankfully so, because the Lazy Susan I got fit perfectly. One thing I didn't see in the instructions, and to my chagrin was rather a derp moment, was specifically how to install the large data port. There are spaces for nuts and countersunk locations for the flathead bolts, but it doesn't specifically say how to install this data port. I decided to use a couple of leftover long bolts to attach to the upper ring permanently and then just cut them down to size. Yes, I did it wrong, but I corrected it later. The arms are printed in 2 pieces with holes for alignment using small bits of filament. You're also supposed to use bolts to hold and secure the 2 pieces together. This leaves an unavoidable gap that needs to be filled. If you browse through YouTube, you'll find that there are a lot of methods out there for finishing 3D printed parts. To close up the gaps in the arms, you can use Bondo or filler putty, but I'm actually going to use a 3D pen. Where the small parts almost line up perfectly, I just melted the seam slightly using the tip of the pen to create a small channel for the filament. It's not necessary to do this to everywhere, but it does help. And because it's going to get sanded to make it look smooth and whole, I didn't worry about the globs of filament in some spots. Next is the filler pieces for the bolt holes. I actually used my slicer to make them taller to fill the entire space, so all I would have to do is weld them in place with the pen and use a small amount of filler. I found that using 120 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander is perfect for knocking down the high spots created by the plastic welding, as well as rough up the surface just enough to bond with the filler putty. Speaking of, I ran out of acetone, so I couldn't thin out the filler before applying it. And yes, I should have used gloves. Skipping over the sanding and painting, and more filling and more sanding and painting, this is the final result of all that hard work, with the part having its final green paint and installed in the droid body. And now, RC has both arms installed. And now, RC's body is relatively done. So, here's where I am for now. As always, there's a lot of work left to be done. I got to get the legs done, the feet done, I got to do all the electronics, maybe some innards for the head, I don't know yet. And I may end up weathering him to give him more of that in-universe feel, but I don't know. But for now, I just wanted to get him to this point so that I could see it done and have that sense of accomplishment that everybody needs. So, if you liked what you saw today, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so that you can be notified whenever a new video drops. And as always, thank you for joining me on this adventure, and may the droids be with you.